Well, okay. I don't think this is going to be a very long lesson today. I'm not really feeling qualified to be a Course in Miracles anything. I don't know what's going on, but I have a person in my life who really is presenting challenges, and I'm at the point where my anger is comes up quite readily, and it's at the surface, and I really don't know what this is all about. Um, But the truth is, when I read the second part of the lesson, and we're on lesson number 323 today, I gladly make the sacrifice of fear. And of course, he has sacrifice in quotes because how would giving up fear be a sacrifice? And yet, it's important to understand the nature of sacrifice, even though it's important for us to understand um, within our own thinking, within our own consciousness, the worldview that we have had, um, based on the consciousness of separation that the ego um, fosters our ability, and to believe in and think is our reality. Um, it's interesting because it's important to realize and come to an understanding that we have made sacrifices, and we do know theoretically what sacrifice means, and the fact that we choose to sacrifice. We literally give up things for one reason or another because for some reason we think if we would be better off. Or when it comes to children, let's say, we sacrifice our own desires to buy a new sweater in favor of, making sure that our children have the clothing and the food that they need. It's important that we understand what sacrifice is, because now, as we are beginning to have experiences of our reality, we can use this word sacrifice in a way in which reminds us that joy has a cost. What I mean is, it doesn't cost anything for joy, yet we pay a price to not be in it. In a sense, we sacrifice our joy now, and now what we're being learned, what we're seeing is, the belief in fear is the sacrificing of joy. And now, when we begin to recognize what our true goal is, love, when we begin to recognize that when we believe in fear and empower it within our experience, we sacrifice our experience and the awareness of love's presence in our lives, in our heart, and our mind. So now we can begin to utilize our understanding of what sacrifice is and what it costs us in a right-minded sense, so that we can refuse to pay that price anymore and allow the corrections to come to undo the fear that was never real to begin with. The reason why I like the second part so much of lesson 323 is, and it's funny, it was interesting. Just yesterday, I don't know why, I don't know, I don't know how to talk about some of the things I feel are important to talk about with you guys. Not because I'm attempting to demonstrate that I know something that you don't, or I know something that you can't, or I'm any different than you. But most of the time I talk about these things because I want to help relieve you of some of the tension in your mind that causes you to think something could go wrong with this plan as you pursue it, because it's so new to many of us in the way we would lead our life. And it's radical and opposite. Radical in the sense that it is most likely opposite to the way that we were taught to lead our lives here in space and time. Here is the only sacrifice. You ask of your beloved Son, you ask him to give up all suffering, all sense of loss and sadness and anxiety, doubt, and freely let your love come streaming into his awareness, healing him of pain and giving him your own eternal joy. Such is the sacrifice you ask of me, and one I would gladly make, of course. When you understand that, when things clear up in your own mind and you see clearly, without the confusion and without the the complexities that the ego overlays on everything, when your mind begins to see simply, because you're understanding the process that you're actually in and the true purpose that you've accepted, and the means by which it is achieved, you begin to see exactly what it is that you've been selling yourself out for, and what your selling of yourself out has cost you. I gladly make the only cost of restoration of your memory to me for the salvation of the world. Of course you would, when you see clearly what's being asked, and it's so, and Jesus is clear. Obviously, Jesus, in his own awakened mind, through his own awakening, having gone through the process, is very clear as to what is occurring. And as we have begun to utilize the lessons in the text, if we've begun to use the lessons to undo our own thinking and have it replaced by the divine reasoning that comes from Jesus in the text, and also in these little contemplations that we get to do every day, such as what is creation. We begin to see clearly, and we begin to see without the complexities that the ego fosters, which manufacture the illusion of limitation rather than foster a condition wherein which we could find the truth of our own whole, perfect, eternal, and infinite mind. When those, as it was in yesterday's, as we talked about in yesterday's lesson, each time we let something go, it's replaced by an understanding of light. And as the light begins to accumulate and take the place in the darkness in our mind, and fear no longer and guilt no longer owns us, we see much more clearly what has been occurring, and we're able to readily begin to make decisions as to what we would like our life to be about and how we would like to live it, and the purpose for which we are going to decide when we are given moments of decision. See, it's not enough just to read it and say, oh yeah, that's what I want. The demonstration of the fact that you want it and the ability for you to receive it are demonstrated when you make a decision, unlike the decisions that you were previously making, which have denied you. That's the key the Holy Spirit's been waiting for, to show you demonstrate your willingness, and he rushes in with his greater willingness and floods you with the light of reality, which shows you exactly the way you are. And as we pay the debt we owe to truth, one of the things that I was being shown yesterday, and Jesus talks about this, he says it's hard for a complex and complicated mind to understand. Although the world of space and time seems to be chaotic, Jesus talks about the descent into fear to the point where we are now rising up. Although it happened in a chaotic, and the world is chaotic, it was how would I say this? It was lawful unto the decisions and the pattern of decision making that was utilized in the manufacturing of the illusion that I find myself in. So in that sense, as decisions were made based on separation, there seems to be this stratification, this hierarchy, and degrees, aspects, and intervals. Okay, while they are not true, they are true within the illusion of space and time. So the undoing must lawfully undo every step of the way, this is the way Jesus talks about it, every step of the way in our descent into fear, in our descent into hell, must be undone willingly by our decision to allow the Holy Spirit to heal our mind through an action of forgiveness. In regards to what this said, there was a point in time when I was given the guidance that said, God, our Creator, wills not for the destruction of anything, including the illusion of death. But what he does will is that we freely choose to give up our illusions. And that we will do as we deal with the resistance to doing of God's will, the resistance in the idea of the separation. And we go back through each step in the descent that allowed us to think that this is a world and our reality. So the getting out of it, the most, how should I say this? The most efficient way to free yourself would be to allow the tension of needing to decide to leave your mind and allow the decisions to be made in a way, in an orderly, and I'm going to say this in a particular way, in a manner which corresponds to the descent, but as an ascent. In our ascent to reality, in the at one point says, give God full assent. Let God fully ascend to your awareness in your mind. In order to allow that to happen, we go back through every step in the descent, and the quickest way is to step back and let Jesus, who is in control of space and time, allow the orchestration to take place in such a way that it undoes each step in the descent in an efficient way so that nothing has to be repeated. And when the, how should I say this? When the situation that represents a step in the descent gets replicated within the consciousness of the separate brotherhood, as we allow ourselves to be shown what needs to be forgiven, how, where, and why, rather than using the ego to come up with what needs to be forgiven, we allow the unconscious descent to be open to the utilization of the Holy Spirit to show us how we can forgive in a lawful, efficient, and miraculous ascent, which lessens the need for time rather than prolongs the confusion and complexity of the fragmentation that has been caused by the mistake, the idea of separation, that we've all identified with, and that has manufactured this sort of stratified illusion of space and time, if that makes any sense. And that's what he's talking about. And as we pay the debt we owe to truth, the debt which merely is the letting go of self-deception and of images we worship falsely, the truth returns to us in wholeness and in joy. We are deceived no longer. Love has now returned to our awareness. And we are at peace again, for fear has gone and only love remains. So every obstacle that we've put in the way of our awareness to love presence will be overcome and surmounted in the exact same way. Okay, that's in the Course. And the most efficient way to bring about the end of the illusion by the decisions that necessitate that necessarily need to be made in order for that to occur, is much like, it's why it's called the plan. It's much like the idea of what's that game, Jumanji? You stack everything up. Well, there's these let's call it a kingpin, a leech pin, a linchpin, okay, whatever word you want. And forgiveness is hang on the ability for that decision to forgive, and then like dominoes, they all fall. Now, when you can allow the Holy Spirit or Jesus to be that which orchestrates your awakening, the utilization of your mind as a miracle worker, you will go back in a systematic fashion and undo each decision that was made that caused the descent, and each decision will be undone in your ascent, so as to eliminate the confusion and the complexity, and for this process to be a simple and lawful one unto the law of the kingdom, and the ability for us to believe and trust the guidance that we're given. Because obviously, if we knew the way, we would have discovered it a long time ago. Now that the way has been discovered, we can be shown the way if we are allowed to by the decision making of our own heart and mind, in the willingness to follow in the way appointed us, as we give up fear and guilt and allow love to be restored to our awareness as the truth of who we are, and the presence of God and the divine within us and within our lives.